Nobody ever knocks on my door that late at night. That's why the sound froze me where I stood, wrench still tight in my hand, knuckles slick with oil. The rain had been coming down hard all evening, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes the world feel smaller. I remember thinking it had to be my imagination. Then the knock came again, softer this time, like whoever was out there was already thinking of giving up. "My name's Ethan. I'm 24, and I fix cars for a living. I live just outside Portland, Oregon, in an old house my parents left me when they died in a car accident 6 years ago. The place is worn down with peeling paint and a porch that groans when you step on it, but it's mine. Most nights I spend my time in the garage out back, working on old cars that may never run again, just to keep the quiet away. That night, I had been under the hood of my '78 Chevy. The radio was playing an old Springsteen song when the knock pulled me back into the world. I wiped my hands on a rag, shut off the music, and walked toward the front door. The porch light flickered as I opened it, and there she was. She stood under the weak yellow glow, soaked from head to toe. Dark hair stuck to her face, rain dripping from the ends. Her jacket was thin and streaked with mud, like she'd been walking for a long time. She did not have a bag or an umbrella, just wide, brown eyes that looked tired but steady. "Sorry," she said, her voice shaking from the cold. "I know it's late, but my phone died and I got lost. Can I come in for a bit?" Quote. I hesitated. I'm not the kind of guy who invites strangers into his house, but something about the way she stood there, trying not to look scared, made it impossible to say no. I stepped aside and nodded. "Yeah," I said, "come in. You're soaked." The warmth of the house hit her as she walked in, water dripping onto the hardwood floor. I handed her a towel and told her to dry off while I made some tea. As the kettle heated, I watched her from the kitchen. She looked around the living room like she was taking it all in. The faded wallpaper, the mismatched furniture, the stack of car magazines on the table. "Nice place," she said, and somehow made it sound honest. "I'm Ethan," I said. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she replied, finally meeting my eyes. "And I promise I don't usually show up at strangers' houses like this." She told me she was a senior at the University of Oregon, heading back to campus when the guy giving her a ride got the wrong idea and kicked her out on the side of the road. I listened while she warmed herself by the old gas heater, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. There was nothing dramatic in her story, just bad luck and worse timing. I told her she could sleep on the couch, and I'd drive her to a bus stop in the morning. She looked relieved, like she'd been holding her breath all night. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd feel safe tonight." Before I went to bed, she stopped me with a quiet thank you and told me she was glad it was my door she knocked on. I didn't know why, but that stayed with me. The next morning, she was still there, curled up on the couch, wearing one of my hoodies, looking like she belonged more than anyone had in years. We shared coffee and burnt toast at the kitchen table, talking easily about nothing and everything. She asked about the garage, about my parents. I asked about her art and her school. For a few hours, the house didn't feel empty. I drove her to the bus stop like I promised, but before she left, she asked if she could come back sometime just to talk. I said yes without thinking. She came back that weekend. Then the next, she brought donuts once, hot chocolate another time. She sat in the garage watching me work, laughing when I got grease on her cheek. Slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, she became part of my life. I told myself it was nothing serious. She had a whole future planned somewhere else. I was just a guy with a wrench in a quiet house. But every time she left, the silence felt heavier. And every time I heard a knock, my heart jumped, hoping it was her. I didn't see it coming. How could I? One minute, Sophie was just a visitor, a kind stranger who happened to knock on my door during a storm. The next, she was a regular. But not the kind of regular that fades into the background of your life. No, she was different. Every time she came back, it felt like something was filling up the space inside me that I'd long ago learned to leave empty. It was always the little things. The way she'd leave her sweater on the couch, or the mug she'd leave in the sink. A small piece of her left behind every time she left. I never thought about it too much. It was just Sophie. Sophie and her easy laugh, her quiet presence. She liked the garage best. She would sit on the old stool I kept near the workbench, legs tucked under her, watching me work like I was doing something important. She asked questions about spark plugs and belts, about why one engine sounded tired while another roared. I answered everything. Even when I knew she didn't really care about the details, she cared about being there. One afternoon, I taught her how to change a tire. She struggled with the lug wrench, laughing and swearing under her breath. When she finally got it loose, she threw her arms up like she had won a prize. I laughed harder than I had in years. Grease smeared across her cheek, and without thinking, I wiped it away with my thumb. The moment hung there, quiet and warm, until she smiled and looked away. Inside the house, things changed too. Her mug appeared next to mine in the cabinet. A sweater she forgot one night stayed draped over the back of the couch. She left a sketchbook on my workbench filled with drawings of cars and corners of the house I had stopped noticing long ago. Seeing my life through her eyes made it feel new. There were mornings I woke up to the smell of coffee and toast, the sound of Sophie humming in the kitchen. There were nights when we sat together on the couch, the rain tapping against the windows, and I realized I didn't want to be anywhere else. But I didn't say anything. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she would leave, that she had a life to go back to. Then came the night everything shifted. The rain had returned, harder than before, drumming against the roof like it had something to prove. We were sitting on the sofa, sharing a blanket, a movie playing, but neither of us watching. Sophie was quiet, lost in thought. She told me about her parents, how everything in her life had already been decided without her. Business school, the right job, the right kind of future. When I'm here, she said, staring at the floor, it feels quiet in my head, like I can breathe. I wanted to tell her to stay. The words were right there, burning my throat. But I knew better. She had a life waiting for her. I was just a stop along the way. So I joked instead, told her she only liked the place because of my terrible cooking. She laughed and leaned her head against my shoulder. I stayed still, afraid that if I moved, the moment would end. The shift happened on a Thursday evening. The rain had been coming down since noon, turning the yard into mud. I was in the garage, fighting with a fuel line on an old Mustang, when the side door creaked open. Sophie stepped in, shaking rain from her jacket, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Thought you could use a break," she said. She climbed onto her stool while I wiped my hands. Steam rose between us as we drank. The garage felt smaller than usual, warmer. She watched me in a way that made my chest tighten, like she was seeing something I had been hiding even from myself. "Ethan," she said quietly, "have you ever felt like you ended up somewhere by accident, but it feels right anyway?" Quote. I looked at her, really looked at her, rain in her hair, hope in her eyes. My mouth opened, but before I could answer, she stepped closer. Her lips brushed mine, soft and unsure. I froze for half a second, then kissed her back. It was not perfect. It was real. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence. "If I said I wanted to stay," she whispered, "what would you say?" Quote. My heart pounded so loud I was sure she could hear it. I told her the truth, that I wanted her there, that I was scared that I didn't know how people from different worlds made things work. She smiled and rested her forehead against mine. "Neither do I," she said, "but I know how this feels." We stayed in the garage that night, talking until the rain slowed and the cold crept in. She fell asleep against my shoulder, and I didn't move. For the first time since my parents died, the quiet didn't hurt. The next morning felt fragile, like something that could break if we named it. We made coffee, careful not to say too much. Everything between us had changed, but neither of us was ready to acknowledge it completely. I wanted to ask her about the kiss, to ask what it meant, but I didn't. Instead, we kept things light, as if pretending nothing had happened would make it less real. The days that followed were quieter than usual. Sophie and I went about our lives, slipping into the small moments that made everything feel just a little bit different. She brought over more of her things, little by little: clothes, a toothbrush, her sketchbook filled with drawings of places she'd seen and things she'd imagined. Her presence, which had once been a fleeting thing, started to settle in like it belonged there. It wasn't sudden, but I could feel the change, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. She'd come over after classes, bringing with her an easy smile and that warmth that seemed to fill every corner of the house. We didn't rush anything. It wasn't like I was suddenly her boyfriend, and she wasn't my girlfriend. We were just two people who had found something good in the quiet, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. Sophie liked to sit in the garage with me while I worked. She'd pull up the stool and just watch, occasionally asking questions about the cars, laughing when I got grease on her cheek. One afternoon, I showed her how to change a tire. She struggled with the lug wrench, swearing under her breath, and when she finally got it loose, she threw her arms up in victory. It was small, but it felt like a win. The house began to feel like home again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. Her laughter in the kitchen, her mug next to mine on the counter, her jacket draped over the back of the couch. Sophie had become part of my world, and I didn't know when it happened, but I was okay with it. One night, after a long day of rain and work, we sat together on the couch, the storm still rattling the windows. The house was warm, the heater humming low in the background. I could feel her beside me, her presence soft and familiar. She had been on my mind all day, even when I was elbow-deep in engines, trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. "I'm glad you're here," I said, breaking the silence. Sophie shifted next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Me too," she said quietly, her voice muffled by the soft fabric of my old hoodie. We stayed like that for a while, just holding on to the quiet moments that didn't need words. I could feel her steady breathing, the weight of her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. It felt like we were building something, piece by piece, without ever having to say it out loud. But not everything was as simple as it seemed. One evening, the storm came back. The rain fell hard, drumming against the roof like it had something to prove. I was in the garage, struggling with a broken fuel line on an old Mustang when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was just the rain, but then I heard it again. Soft, gentle, the kind of knock that was barely there, like someone wasn't sure if they should be there at all. My heart jumped into my throat, and I wiped my hands on my jeans before walking to the front door. I wasn't sure why, but I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Sophie stood on the porch, rain dripping from her hair, holding a cup of tea from the diner down the road. She wasn't dressed to be out in the storm, her jacket soaked through, her face pale with something I couldn't quite place. "I thought you could use a break," she said with a small smile. I stepped aside to let her in, and the moment she crossed the threshold, the house felt warmer, like it had been holding its breath waiting for her. She gave me the cup of tea, and I held it between my hands, the steam rising between us as we stood in the quiet of the living room. She didn't speak right away. She just watched me, her eyes soft but intense, like she was waiting for something to happen, but I couldn't tell what. "Ethan," she said after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper, "have you ever felt like you ended up somewhere by accident, but it feels right anyway?" Quote. I was quiet for a moment, letting her words sink in. She was looking at me like she wanted me to say something, but I didn't know how to answer. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice low. "I think I know exactly what you mean." She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, eyes locked on mine. The storm raged outside, but inside, it was just us. Sophie set her tea down on the table and took a step closer. She reached up, her fingers brushing against my cheek in a way that sent a shock of electricity through my body. She stepped even closer, and then, without warning, her lips brushed against mine. It was soft, uncertain, but it felt like everything that had been building between us had finally found a way to break free. When we pulled away, neither of us spoke. The rain outside was loud, but the silence between us was louder. "If I said I wanted to stay," she whispered, "what would you say?" My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to say the words I had been holding back for weeks. But instead, I just nodded, my voice hoarse. "I'd say you don't have to leave." Sophie smiled, a small, sad smile, and rested her forehead against mine. "I think I already knew that," she said quietly. And in that moment, something changed. The world outside might have been falling apart, but inside, everything felt like it was falling into place. The days that followed were a blur of quiet mornings and soft conversations. Sophie had stayed. She wasn't just visiting anymore. She was part of the rhythm of the house, of my life. The awkwardness that once existed between us had slowly melted away, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. There were no big confessions, no dramatic declarations. It was just us, navigating this space we had somehow carved out together. She kept bringing things with her, little by little, clothes, books, and more of her sketchbooks, which she would leave scattered on the coffee table. She didn't ask, and neither did I, but it felt like she was finding a way to make this place hers too. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and see her sitting on the couch, sketching the house in ways I'd never noticed before, capturing the worn-out edges, the quiet corners that were so familiar to me, but new to her. I didn't tell her, but I was falling into this. The quiet mornings when we'd sit at the kitchen table sipping coffee and talking about nothing felt like everything. The way she hummed while she cooked, the way she laughed when she caught me sneaking an extra donut, the way she'd find her way into the garage, leaning against the workbench as I worked, like she belonged there. I thought I was okay with it. I told myself it was just a phase, that Sophie would move on. She had a future waiting for her, but every time I looked at her, it felt harder to believe that she'd just leave one day. Then came the call. It was a Wednesday evening, and Sophie and I had just finished dinner. The rain had taken a break for the first time in days, but the air still felt thick and heavy, like the storm wasn't quite done. We were sitting on the couch, sharing a blanket, talking about our day. I could feel her warmth next to me, her presence as constant now as the creaks of the house. I didn't expect anything to change, but then the phone rang, slicing through the peaceful moment. Sophie froze. I watched her face go pale, her smile slipping. She didn't say anything, but I knew the moment she heard the voice on the other end. "Yeah?" she said, her voice flat. She stood up, pacing toward the kitchen, her hand tight around the phone. Her expression shifted from confusion to tension, and I could hear snippets of the conversation through the thin walls. "You need to come home, now." I couldn't hear the rest, but it didn't matter. I knew what it meant. Sophie returned a few minutes later, the phone still in her hand, her face an unreadable mask. "I have to go," she said quietly, her voice trembling just enough for me to hear. "My dad wants me to come back. They're making me go home." The words hung in the air like smoke. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat, but it wouldn't go down. "I don't understand," I said, standing up, unsure what I was even asking. I thought this was your choice." Sophie's eyes welled up, but she quickly wiped away the tears, her voice catching as she spoke. "It was," she said. "But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about them. My parents, my future. They won't let me go. They're threatening everything I've worked for." I didn't know what to say. I could feel it. I could feel the space between us widening, not because of what we said, but because of what we didn't. I wanted to tell her to stay. I wanted to beg her to stay with me, here, where everything felt right. But I knew better than that. "You don't have to leave," I said, my voice hoarse with something I couldn't name. "You don't have to go." But she shook her head. "I have no choice." I wish I did. There was nothing I could say to make it better, no words to fix what was happening. She didn't pack much. She grabbed a bag of clothes, a few things from the bathroom, and a few of her sketchbooks. She didn't look at me when she walked to the door, but I could see it in the way she hesitated before she stepped outside, like she was leaving a piece of herself behind. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking as she turned and walked down the porch steps. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been. The house felt smaller without her. The quiet that followed was not peaceful. It was suffocating. I didn't know how long I stood there, just staring at the door, waiting for her to come back, for this to be some kind of mistake. But when I finally turned around, the empty mug on the kitchen counter, The empty space on the couch told me everything I needed to know. Sophie was gone, and I didn't know if she'd ever come back. The house felt wrong without Sophie. Not empty, but wrong. The kind of wrong that comes with a piece of you missing, with the silence being louder than the noise. It had been 3 days since she left, and every minute of those days had dragged by like I was stuck in a fog. I kept telling myself that it was for the best, that she had a life to go back to, that it wasn't fair to expect her to stay. But even as I tried to convince myself, I could feel the weight of the empty spaces she had left behind. The house, once so familiar, now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something I wasn't sure was coming. I tried to stay busy. I worked at the shop more than usual, taking on extra hours. I fixed cars with a focus I hadn't had in months, just to drown out the sound of my own thoughts. But even as I twisted wrenches and replaced parts, my mind kept wandering back to Sophie, to the way she had looked at me the last time I saw her, to the way she had said goodbye without looking back. I told myself I was okay with it, that I had no right to ask her to stay, that her parents, her future, were bigger than me. But every time I came home, every time I opened the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Then came the knock. I had just finished dinner, a quick meal I barely noticed. The rain was back, falling harder than before, and the house had that same quiet, tense feeling. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't heard from Sophie since the day she left, and I'd stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. But the knock came anyway. It was soft at first, like a hesitant tap on the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I wiped my hands on my jeans before walking toward it. For a second, I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. I almost convinced myself that it wasn't her. But when I opened the door, there she was. Sophie stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, holding nothing but a small bag. Her eyes were wide, her expression uncertain, but there was something else there, something that made my chest tighten. She hadn't come back with an apology or an explanation. She just stood there, waiting for me to say something. "You left," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I know," she replied, her voice trembling as she stepped forward, rain dripping from her hair. "I'm sorry. I had to go, but I couldn't stay away." I didn't know what to say. My heart was racing, and I wanted to pull her inside, hold her, tell her everything I had been thinking since the day she left. But instead, I just stood there, letting the rain fall between us, unsure of what to do. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you come back?" Sophie hesitated, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting my gaze. "Because I was wrong," she said quietly. "I thought I had to follow the path they laid out for me. But I don't, not anymore." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had left because she thought it was what she was supposed to do, what her parents expected, what everyone else expected. But in the end, she realized something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. She didn't belong in a world that didn't feel like hers. She belonged here, with me. Sophie stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The moment she crossed the threshold, the house felt different. It was like the air had cleared, like a weight had been lifted. She didn't say anything as she set down her bag. She just stood there, looking at me, the silence stretching between us. For a moment, I wondered if she was just as unsure as I was. But then, without a word, I pulled her into my arms. She held on tightly, like she had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. "I'm not going anywhere this time," she whispered against my chest. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm here, Ethan. I'm here." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her words were enough. And in that moment, I knew everything was going to be different. We had chosen each other. We had found our way back to each other. And this time, we weren't running away from it. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, the rain continuing to pour outside. I didn't know what the future would look like. But in that moment, with Sophie in my arms, I realized something. It didn't matter. We would figure it out together.